Have you ever noticed that when something goes wrong in your life, you're usually the last person you turn to for comfort? You might text a friend, scroll through social media, rewatch a familiar show, or distract yourself with work. But the idea of sitting with your own feelings, actually listening to them, almost feels awkward. Like trying to have a deep conversation with someone you barely know, even though that someone is literally you. And yet, some people seem to move through emotional storms differently. They still feel pain, rejection, anxiety, disappointment, all of it. But instead of immediately reaching outward, they instinctively turn inward. They regulate themselves, they process, they soothe. They don't panic when they're alone with their thoughts. In psychology, this is often described as emotional self-reliance. And no, it doesn't mean being cold, detached, or I don't need anyone energy. It's something much quieter and much deeper. So the real question isn't, do you have emotions? Obviously you do. The real question is, when emotions hit, who handles them? Is it you? Or is it everyone and everything around you? Think about the last time you felt overwhelmed. Not the dramatic kind of overwhelmed, but the subtle version. That low-level anxiety that sits in your chest, that heaviness you can't quite explain, that irritation that makes everything feel slightly off. What did you do? Did you immediately look for something to numb it? Music, food, messages, reels, YouTube, someone else's attention? Or did you pause and actually ask yourself, what's going on inside me right now? Most of us are never taught how to emotionally self-regulate. We're taught how to behave, how to be polite, how to perform, how to suppress, but rarely how to sit with our internal world without panicking or escaping. So we grow up with this unspoken belief that emotions are problems that need to be fixed externally. Someone should reassure me. Something should distract me. Some situation should change so I can feel better. But emotional self-reliance is when your nervous system learns a different story. It learns that emotions aren't emergencies. They're information, signals, weather patterns in your internal climate, and you are the one who can learn to read them. From a psychological perspective, this starts very early in life. Attachment theory talks about how, as children, we learn whether our emotions are safe to feel. If a caregiver responds consistently, calmly, and empathetically, the child's brain wires itself to believe, my feelings make sense. I can handle them. I'm not alone, but I'm also not helpless. Over time, that external regulation becomes internal regulation. The child grows into an adult who can self-soothe. But if emotions were ignored, dismissed, punished, or met with chaos, the brain learns something else. It learns, my feelings are too much. I need someone else to manage them for me, or I need to run from them. And that doesn't make you broken, it makes you human, with a nervous system that adapted to survive. Here's the strange part. Emotional self-reliance often looks invisible from the outside. It doesn't look like confidence in a loud way. It doesn't look like motivational quotes or emotional speeches. It looks like someone who doesn't overreact. Someone who doesn't spiral when things go wrong. Someone who can be alone without feeling abandoned by themselves. It's the person who feels anxious and says, okay, I'm anxious. Let me sit with this for a moment, instead of immediately asking, who can fix this for me? It's the person who feels rejected and thinks, this hurts, but I know I'll be okay, instead of, this proves I'm unlovable. It's the person who can experience emotional discomfort without turning it into an identity, and neuroscience gives us a fascinating explanation for this. When emotions arise, the limbic system lights up, especially the amygdala, which is basically your brain's emotional alarm system. If you never learned self-regulation, that alarm feels like a fire. Urgent, dangerous. You need to escape. You need relief now, so you reach for external regulation. But when you practice emotional self-reliance, something different happens. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reflection and meaning-making, stays online. It gently says, I see what's happening. This is uncomfortable, but it's not a threat. And over time, your nervous system literally becomes less reactive. You feel the same emotions, but they don't hijack you. It's like the difference between being inside a storm with no shelter and watching a storm from behind a window. You still see the lightning, you still hear the thunder, but you're not being struck by it. One of the biggest misconceptions is emotionally self-reliant people don't need others. That's not true at all. In fact, emotionally self-reliant people often have deeper relationships because they don't use others as emotional life rafts. They don't unconsciously demand that someone else regulate their inner world. They share emotions, but they don't outsource them. There's a subtle difference between "I'm sharing this because I trust you" and "I'm sharing this because I can't hold it on my own." One is connection, the other is dependency. And most of us oscillate between the two without realizing it. Think about how often we look for emotional validation before we even understand our own feelings. We say, "Am I wrong for feeling this?" before we say, "Why am I feeling this?" We want permission to feel instead of curiosity about what we feel. Emotional self-reliance flips that script. It's when you give yourself emotional permission first, when you become the first witness to your inner experience, not the last. There's actually a concept in psychology called self-soothing, and it sounds simple, but it's surprisingly radical. It means being able to calm your own nervous system without external intervention, not through suppression, not through distraction, but through presence. Presence is uncomfortable because it removes the noise. No phone, no background audio, no emotional escape routes, just you and whatever is happening inside you. And for many people, that feels more threatening than the emotion itself, because when you finally sit with your feelings, you might realize things you've been avoiding. That you're lonely, that you're exhausted, that you're grieving something you never named, that you've been living a life that looks fine on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. Emotional self-reliance isn't about being strong. It's about being honest. It's about being able to say, "This hurts," without immediately turning that pain into a story about your worth, your future, or your identity. You feel the emotion as a sensation, not a verdict. A lot of people think their emotions define them. I feel anxious, therefore I am an anxious person. I feel rejected, therefore I am unlovable. But emotions are temporary neural patterns. They're experiences passing through consciousness, not permanent truths about who you are. Emotionally self-reliant people learn to separate experience from identity. They don't say, "I am sadness." They say, "Sadness is visiting me." That small shift is huge. It turns emotions into messengers instead of enemies. And once you stop fighting your emotions, something unexpected happens. They become quieter. Not because they disappear, but because they no longer need to scream to be heard. Become a child tugging at your sleeve. If you ignore them, they pull harder. If you acknowledge them, they relax. Your emotions work the same way. One of the most powerful signs of emotional self-reliance is how you handle silence. Not social silence, but internal silence. The moments when there's nothing distracting you from yourself. Can you sit in that space without reaching for something? Can you feel bored without panicking? Can you feel sad without immediately trying to fix it? This is why practices like journaling, mindfulness, and reflective thinking are so often linked to emotional intelligence. They're not productivity hacks. They're training grounds for self-relationship. They teach your brain, "I can be with myself." And that's a radical belief in a world that constantly tells you to escape yourself. There's also a philosophical side to this. If you can't emotionally rely on yourself, you're always negotiating your inner peace with external conditions. People must behave a certain way. Life must go a certain way. Circumstances must cooperate. Otherwise, you can't be okay. But emotional self-reliance gives you a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom from pain, but the freedom to move through pain without losing yourself. It's the difference between "I'll be okay if everything goes right" versus "I'll be okay even if things go wrong." It doesn't make you invincible, it makes you resilient. And resilience isn't about toughness, it's about flexibility. The ability to bend emotionally without breaking psychologically. You still need people, you still need connection, you still need love, but you no longer need someone else to be the manager of your emotional world. You become the home you return to. Which is important because no matter how many people love you, no one lives inside your mind except you. You are the one who hears your thoughts at 3 a.m. You are the one who feels your anxiety in your chest. You are the one who carries your memories, your regrets, your hopes. Emotional self-reliance is learning to be a safe place for all of that. Not a perfect place, not a peaceful place all the time, but a place where emotions are allowed to exist without being judged, suppressed, or dramatized. And here's the quiet truth most people never realize. The more emotionally self-reliant you become, the less you fear being alone. Not because you don't want others, but because solitude no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like space.
Space to think, space to feel, space to understand yourself without noise. And in that space, you start to develop something even more valuable than emotional control. You develop emotional trust. You trust that whatever arises inside you, you can handle it. You don't need to run from yourself anymore. So maybe emotional self-reliance isn't about becoming stronger. Maybe it's about becoming more intimate with your own inner life, about building a relationship with yourself that doesn't collapse the moment something feels uncomfortable. Because at the end of the day, the one person you can't escape, the one person you will spend every single moment with, is you. And learning how to emotionally rely on yourself might be one of the most important relationships you ever build. If this made you reflect a little, sit with that feeling. That's already emotional self-reliance in action. And if you want, you can share in the comments what you noticed about your own patterns. Sometimes the first step to understanding your psychology is simply being curious enough to look inward.